The next stage up is lack of commitment. And if you're experiencing a lack of commitment, essentially team members' desires and interests and ambitions, if you like, they become ambiguous, or indeed people themselves, team members, become ambivalent. So that lack of commitment manifests itself as people appearing as though they can't be bothered. And the usual cause of that is that people don't want to buy in to ideas if they don't have the opportunity to weigh in. As by that I mean don't have the opportunity to contribute. And there's usually a sub-team which is driving an agenda in any given team at any given time. So you've got this sub-team who is trying to establish a way of doing things or trying to push a decision to be made. And the requirement that you're looking for from your team that is going to ultimately determine the success of that is a desire for consensus among all team members and a need for certainty that what is being discussed is what is going to happen. And there are countless examples in organizations where there is the veneer of consensus and the veneer of people having the opportunity to contribute, but then there's a lack of clarity and certainty around about how them being listened to translated into what actually happened. So there's a strong desire for consensus among high-functioning teams. One of the features of that is that achieving unanimous, unequivocal consensus is often or even never going to be possible. But the one thing that is possible is getting people to buy in, and there is a difference between agreeing and buying in to an idea or a course of action. If there's trust and if there's no fear of conflict, then reasonable people will be understanding if they don't get their way all the time. But they also will be understanding of the fact that they don't need to get their way in order to be able to support a decision. They need to have their opinion listened to and for options that they place on the table to be considered. And that's a form of consensus building, is within a team there is a way of behaving that incorporates the opinions and preferences of all involved. And the process of listening to all those different opinions is a process of gathering consensus around about a course of action in which everybody is invested and bought in. It may be clear that someone doesn't agree or would prefer another course of action, but that's okay, because if there's good trust within the team, it will be recognized that not everyone gets their way all the time. You might be able to think of a certain powerful American blonde guy who is reasonably well known around the world, who is a classic example of someone who doesn't display any capability of that compromise, consensus building approach that is so important to team effectiveness. He either gets his way or is really unhappy. A little bit the way that a young child will be. They've decided what they want and then they get unhappy when they don't get it. That's not the way that you would expect a team that espouses good trust and psychological safety to behave. If a team finds itself at a point where it can't make a decision, which is something that does often happen, that's where you expect the leadership function to make a call. The important thing about that call is that there is transparency to the process that they use to end up at the decision they make, and that the whole team is aware of why they reached that decision. And that need for clarity and certainty is related to the idea that teams have to make decisions all the time, and actually a decision is better than no decision. This lecture is called Team Culture and Failure, and all these discussions around about the Lencioni 5 dysfunctions relate to a team's attitude towards failure. If you understand that a decision is better than no decision, and waffling and meandering around about the decision-making process rather than making a bold decision that possibly later proves to be wrong is a demonstration of a fear of failure. A team should be self-confident enough to be able to arrive at a decision that everybody is bought into through a consensus, that they are then later comfortable with the idea of being proven to be a failure. Teams can always change course, but being stuck treading water is often a symptom of a malfunctioning team. And that process of delaying decisions ultimately leads to a form of paralysis of the team's productivity, and also a loss of confidence. There's a paradoxical confidence you gain from having an open attitude towards failure, which is that you can't really lose confidence in yourselves if your attitude towards failure is one that recognizes the learning benefits of going through a failing process. Understanding that things are likely to go wrong and you are likely to be proven that the course of action you decided upon was perhaps incorrect, but your ability to take lessons from that and use those lessons to inform future decisions is a sign of a good, self-confident and open-minded team. The US Army General Stanley McChrystal, he said that the way that he approached his leadership of multiple teams in Iraq was to simply assume that the decisions they made were probably wrong, but they were going on the best intelligence they had, and equally 100% of the time to expect things to go badly, expect complete chaos as a result of the decision you made. And when you adapt to living in that world, you start to become a bit more resilient to the challenges you face when you do encounter failure. And we've touched on leadership. Let's look a little bit into the approach of a leadership function within a team around about commitment and clarity. How do you get your team to commit or at least buy in to ideas? Well, firstly, the idea of making sure that key messages are shared among team members constantly, identifying what the kind of key messages that should be shared and are important to the team are, and then making sure that they are consistently shared. Having a review process in place for key decisions, and that incorporates the team. And there's actually a lecture on briefing and debriefing, and that takes into account the idea of review and the importance of including team members in a review process, but making sure that there is a protocol of reviewing key decisions in place within a team. And within that process, you also need to agree what it is that you're going to communicate to the broader team, and in an organizational context, inevitably other teams around you, and we'll talk about teams of teams shortly. It's a fact of life, but you're going to need to work to deadlines as well, and time is a constant, and identifying deadlines ensures that kind of misalignment of work practices and performance is identified and then therefore can be addressed through the review process that's already in place. I mentioned the idea of attitude towards disaster. You've got to have a worst case scenario contingency in place, so that contained within the discussions that you might have around about forming a decision, you're also highlighting to your fellow team members that the worst can happen, the unexpected does take place, and by tackling some scenarios, often some scenarios that transpire are unforeseeable, but tackling some of the worst case scenarios that could take place actually serves to reduce fears and increase confidence in taking the decisions that have been made. One of the core things that it does is it demonstrates to the team that bad decisions are survivable, in inverted commas, so the team, that fear of failure is diminished because failure is not considered to be absolute. It's not terminal. It's something that you can survive that will be a bit rocky. Leadership functions can also expose team members to almost experiences of practicing dealing with risk. So by exposing team members to a smaller amount of risk, they learn a little bit of resilience and also learn about how to come to strategic decisions themselves. So it makes the team more self-sufficient. And by exposing people to lower risk decisions, you're helping them practice A, the process of becoming committed themselves, and B, what it means to get people committed to their decisions, because they have to then communicate the importance of buying into the decisions that they're making. Ultimately, the leader must be prepared to get it wrong, and that vulnerability and empathy we talked about before, they must have the vulnerability and empathy to be able to be open and share instances where things have gone wrong.